I just wanted to say hello to director Vijay Jayapal, who we just watched Nirvana In, his second feature, and wanted to talk to him about it and see what he has to say about some of the interesting things that he's been doing, the interesting things about the film, and perhaps where he's been, where he's going next, all those sorts of things. So, hello, Vijay.
Hi, Josh. Thanks for doing this and thanks for having me here. Thanks to Indie Meme Film Festival for doing this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's great. I've actually I personally have met Vijay a few years ago. We spoke at the NFDC Film Bazaar back in 2017, before Nirvana In was completed, and then when he mentioned the idea about the film to me, I was very interested, still very interested, and we've kept in touch throughout post-production and then the beginning of the festival runs and things. And so I think the main reason that I'm here doing this Q&A with you is that this is sort of my specialty, the genre films, horror films, that sort of thing. And they're really it's really interesting, I think, that you chose this as your second feature, because it is kind of unusual. Not that genre or horror films are necessarily unusual in India in general, but sort of in the independent space, that sort of thing hasn't really been, I wouldn't say not popular, but it's not something that producers tend to go after. So where did this idea come from for you?
Well, the idea initially was not to make a genre film per se. I got this idea, story idea, to make this film way back in 2015 when I read a news report about a flight that crashed in Europe, I think in Germany. And when they did an investigation around the incident, they found out that the, one of the pilots had suicidal thoughts and intentionally crashed the flight. That was the news report. When I read it, I was very fascinated. It was very disturbing. Of course, it was disturbing, and I was terrified. And how can somebody do something like this and all of that? But equally, I was also intrigued and fascinated about the psyche of this person. What would have probably gone through in this guy's mind when he did something so horrifying like this. So that was the first moment when I first thought, okay, there is a story here. So yeah, and then I was working on other things, and then after a few months, I was in this resort in Kerala, in South India, with my family and friends, and that's where I really decided that I should make a film, about this incident, and then it became an amalgamation of various things, and it became a genre film. It became a psychological horror film during the writing process. The idea was to make a film about a person who's suffering from guilt and all of that. Even my first film explored guilt as a theme from a very different context. So I'm really fascinated with these themes of guilt and isolation and being an outsider and all of that. So that was the idea. But while writing it, I thought maybe psychological horror could be a good platform to tell the story. It could be a good tool to tell the story in a very effective way, and also it was very instinctive. I can't even rationalize it now and say, okay, it was a very instinctive decision to know. So it became a genre film, thereafter. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was actually thinking about that when I was watching it again this morning to remind myself of some of the details, is that it does follow up those themes of isolation, the themes of sort of being an outsider, that also are reflected in your first film, Revelations, with the Tamil families living in Kolkata, and sort of creating that the bond between them that's sort of forced because they are the only two people in their housing block that have that connection. And then here
Yeah.
is kind of the opposite. You have Adil Hussein's character, Jogi, coming from Assam to Himachal Pradesh and having really no one around, and no one to bond with, and being sort of left alone with his thoughts, and that thoughts are the things that end up sort of coming back to bite him.
Yeah.
So is that something that you're just interested in general about, is the idea of isolation? I know one thing that's very interesting about Indian film in general, and especially films that are like this one, sort of set outside of the major, not only major industries, but also the major population hubs, that there are so many different ways where you can be a stranger in your own country. And so is that something that you find interesting as well?
Oh yeah, I think I've said this many times. I consider myself an outsider in my own city. Very weird because I was born and brought up in Chennai. I've lived all my life in Chennai, but still I've always had this feeling that I am an outsider for various reasons. And I don't know. I can't really pinpoint and say that this is the reason, but for various reasons. And I have been a very lonely guy, in my personal life for a very long time. And even now, I'm not someone who go out a lot. And in fact, this pandemic has not created a big difference to me at all. Even without the pandemic, I never used to go out and hang out and all that stuff. I step out of my house only when there is a urgent need and whatever. So yeah, I've been always like that. And even culturally speaking, I know the no. When I was growing up, I was, of course, I grew up on Indian commercial films, Tamil films, and South Indian films and Hindi films. But beyond that point, those films really didn't, fascinate me a lot. And when I decided to become a filmmaker, obviously I wanted to tread a different path. And uh, no, in fact, consider myself as a middle of the road filmmaker. I don't consider myself as an independent art house filmmaker, or for that matter, a commercial filmmaker. I'm somewhere in the middle, and this film is ample proof for that, because it's neither a commercial film nor, for a lack of better word, I would have to say, an art house film. Or it's somewhere in the middle. It's neither that, it's neither this. So yeah, so that feeling of outsider has always been there. What kind of film that I want to do, what kind of people I want to be with, all of that has always been a question in my life, and naturally it became a theme that I got fascinated with. When I started making films, even in my short films, were exploring the same things, more or less. So, yeah.
I do find that interesting too, that in the position that you find yourself, like you said, sort of between the art house and more commercial films, and being from an in Chennai, if there is sort of any major film industry or major, of the major industries in India that is more friendly to that type of film, it would be, I mean, probably 10 years ago or even less, we would have just said like the Tamil film industry is where audiences are more experimental. They'll be happy with plot driven films rather than, well, not rather than, but as well as the star driven films. Like you've got your Mani Ratnams and obviously big names there, but other filmmakers who are now making really big stuff out there, Karthik Subbaraj and Paranjit and stuff like that, were making not necessarily art house films, but certainly more experimental stuff when they started out. When you were growing up, were there any filmmakers in Tamil Nadu that you found influential, like as a kid even?
Yeah, obviously, Mani Ratnam was a big influence, growing up. In fact, it was his film Iruvar, which really changed, I would say, my life, because I was still in my school, and I was very young, and that was the first film that I watched that really, told me that okay, there is a director who's, because see, growing up, you always kind of fans of stars. When for a large period, I was a fan of Rajnikant. And then I shifted my loyalties to Kamal Hassan after a period of time. When I was in my teens, suddenly I became a Kamal Hassan fan. Not that I don't like Rajnikant, I still like him, but I became more a fan of Kamal Hassan when I was in my teens. But I never understood the power of a filmmaker. I never understood that a director is there and he's the one who really calls the shots. But it was watching Irva, that really, for some reason, it became the first, the film that really, made me to developed this desire to become a filmmaker. So yeah, Mani Ratnam obviously, and see, I'm a fan of commercial cinema also. Well-made commercial entertainer still works for me a lot. No, that way, Mani Ratnam, obviously, of course, as you said, Mani Ratnam can't be classified as a typical commercial filmmaker. Even he is a middle of the road filmmaker in that sense. No. And K. Balachandar, Bharati Raja, so all those Mahendran and Balu Mahendra and all those filmmakers of the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, and so all those filmmakers. Because I was a big movie buff, and I come from a family which is also crazy about cinema. So my parents are also they watch a lot of films, and my mother is a big Balachandra fan, and so even as a kid I used to watch all films. So yeah, I was always fascinated by cinema, and yes, Mani Ratnam in a way was the starting point. But then when I started watching world films, there was a small deviation, I would say, in terms of my sensibility and all of that. I started watching all those the masters of world cinema, and it kind of created an impression on me and all of that. So yeah, so I think I'm still discovering my voice as a filmmaker. I won't say that I've decided yet that okay, this is what I need to do. I think my first two films are just an indication of what I'm going to do in the future. I'm still trying to discover my path, discover my voice, and I think I myself will discover or realize what kind of filmmaker that I'm going to be in the long run. It depends on the next few years in terms of the film that I'm going to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the path that you mentioned there, being growing up as a Rajinikanth fan and then moving on to Kamal Hassan, as someone who has programmed both of their films and retrospectives at film festivals, it does kind of reflect sort of a maturation process. With Kamal Hassan being more art house kind of in general and more expansive in terms of what he is interested in doing. Whereas Rajinikanth is just happy to be Rajinikanth even still, and I've done essays on Blu-ray discs about Rajinikanth because I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I know.
I have all kinds of action figures and things at my house, but it's because of the icon and less the actor. So one of the things, and this goes back to a conversation I had with another filmmaker a couple of years ago, Vetri Maran, when he was doing press for Visarnai. And I mentioned the same idea about, he is very, very firmly entrenched in the Tamil filmmaking community. Like those are the films that he makes. But even with Visarnai, it's the same kind of idea that you were talking about with the isolation and the migrants and the challenges that they face. But what he mentioned to me was something similar to what you said, was that how in Chennai there is this sort of community of filmmakers who are making new and interesting things and he said it was because Chennai is a port city, and so there were lots of DVD stalls there. You could get all kinds of stuff from outside that wasn't necessarily available in other parts of the country. So does that reflect your experience as well? Like in your, I would say, late teens, early 20s, finding?
Oh yeah, we have this place called Burma Bazaar in Chennai, very close to the Marina Beach, and you go to that place, you will see a lot of these DVD shops. Even now you can go there and see a lot of these shops, and unfortunately now most of these DVD shops have become electronic shops where they sell electronic goods. But when I was in my teens, growing up in the 90s, and even when I was in my college, in the early 2000s, I always used to go there and buy these DVDs, and most of them, I'm not sure whether I can say this here, but pirated versions of DVDs of all kinds of cinema, Hollywood, Europe, and all of that. And so yeah, and also I think, see, the Tamil the both the audience as well as the filmmaking community here is very knowledgeable. They are very well informed. Like we watch all kinds of cinema. We watched Malayalam, Hindi, Bengali. Everybody here knows Satyajit Ray, Gatak, Adur Gopalakrishnan. At the same time, we are also fans of Fahad Fazil and Dilish Potan and all the new generation Malayalam filmmakers. And at the same time, we are also big fans of Anurag Kashyap and Motwani, and so we watch all kinds of films, and we are big time Tarantino fans, and and Paul Thomas Anderson and Kubrick, and so that culture is definitely there. And I'm not sure whether it's because we are a port city, is that the reason? I'm not sure about that geographical significance, but yes, definitely, people here are crazy about cinema and they want to watch all kinds of cinema. Even the audience, like uh, the kind of film that Balachandra did in the 70s and the 80s, they were phenomenally ahead of its times in terms of the themes that he was exploring, of course, in a very different way, because he came from a very theater background, and the treatment would be little theatrical and all of that. But themes that he was addressing in those films in 70s, I doubt whether we can do it today. The kind of even though we have evolved as a filmmaking community and all of that, because yeah, it's always been there. And I agree with that. Yeah.
So I have a few questions about the performers and the actors in the film. We at Indie Meme have long been fans of Adil Hussain. He's incredibly talented. Like, he's one of the top, certainly as far as independent films go. If you can get him, like, you're gonna probably be okay. And it rang true to me when I was watching the film again, and I'd noticed this the first few times I'd seen it as well, is that this film could have been written for him. Like, did you have him in mind when you were writing it? Because it is kind of about, I mean, he's from Assam as well, and so a lot of the stuff rings very true as far as him being, a migrant into sort of Hindi independent films for the most part. I mean, he does other stuff as well, but it felt like a really, really good fit with your script. Like, was your script initially, did you have someone like that in mind when you started writing?
Well, when I started writing, no, I was not thinking of any actor for that matter. But after writing it, the first name that came to my mind was obviously Adil, because it's a very performance-driven film. Because the film is about this guy. So whoever plays Jogi is very center to the whole film's scheme of things. So I have to get the right actor to play this role. And in fact, interestingly, when I wrote the script, it was not supposed to be set in Assam. It was actually set in Kerala. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be a Kathakali dancer and who's a boat driver in a place like Tekadi, goes to the north and things like that. But since I wanted Adil Hussain to play the lead role, and I reached out to him. Luckily, he saw my first film, he liked it, and he read the script and came on board pretty quickly. Though the dates were a problem initially, but we had to figure that out. But so once he came on board, obviously I had to make some demographic changes. It can't be a film about Kerala and Kathakali and all of that. So I had to change a few things in the script to suit his image and his background as an actor and all of that, because it's a very complicated character, and you have to speak with an accented Hindi, and it has to have this Assamese accent, and we had to work a lot of things. So I thought it would be better for him to play this character rather than play a character from Kerala, because then he would have to speak Hindi with a Malayalam accent, which would have been much more difficult for him. And initially we thought we would do that, but then we didn't have time. So we thought, okay, we will do some workshops and we'll do some, we'll maybe hire a dialect coach, and we thought about it, but then we didn't have the time and we didn't have the money also, because it's a small independent film. So I thought the best thing to do would be to change the demographic, and and then once we made those changes, it became a tailor-made role. Because I cannot recollect an indie film where Adil had played an Assamese character. He has done indie films, but he has never played an Assamese. He's a guy from Assam, in an indie film. So I think, if my remembrance is correct. So that became interesting, and the role became tailor-made for him once these changes were made. And he was phenomenal. And I always call him the light of the film, because without him, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are other good actors too, but the kind of honesty and intensity that he brought into this character was enormous.
Yeah, it was really a tremendous performance, and as you said, it does help culturally that the Kathakali dancers in Kerala and the folk dance, the Bhavana folk dance in Assam are similar traditions. I mean, there's traditions like that all over India as well. But the mask tradition also really helps, and that the masks are wonderful in the film. and they play such an important part, not only plot wise, but culturally and and representation and all that stuff is all really excellent. Yeah, and I think you're right. I'm trying to think of other films where he's played an Assamese character in a non-Assamese film, because I know he did Kotanodi and he's done other Assamese films before that, but he's mostly in Hindi films, so that's great. And then the rest of your cast also, I was looking it up, and I know Rajshri Deshpande, who was in Sacred Games for a bit. She was in Sexy Durga, which got her in trouble with like everybody else from that film. And then I didn't realize this, but then all three of the leads were also in Angry Indian Goddesses a few years ago.
Yes.
But as far as I know, it's also all of their first horror films. I know they've done genre stuff in the past, but this is sort of, I guess Kotanodi is a horror film, but I think that's really interesting to bring all of them into this as well. So what did they think about that? What was their reaction when you showed them the project?
One thing which we had discussed was that even though the film is kind of psychological horror and genre, it's not a conventional horror film, because we were not going for that. We wanted to make something no more subdued and understated, and that became a big problem, because you're taking up a genre like horror, which is explosive, and to subvert it and make it subtle and understated is, because tonally it becomes a problem. Tone and rhythm can sometimes become a problem, but I just went for it. And when they read the script, that was the reaction. Like, when I told them the one line on phone before they read the script, obviously the one line synopsis was like a typical horror film. But when they read the script, what they read was very different from what I told them, at least as a one line, because because your expectations are kind of molded in a certain way when you when you hear these words like horror and ghost and all of that. But the idea was not to make a conventional horror film, but to do something different with that genre. So, but once they read the script, they really liked it. And they all had their own interpretations. Adil called it a creepy film, Sandhya called it a horror film, and Rashri called it a psychological horror film. So they all had their own interpretation, and the film also has it, because the film has a lot of ambiguity in it. So so it is very open for interpretation. You can interpret things. So yeah, but they were all very excited. They were all very excited because even Adil told me that he hasn't done a film like, even Putanodi, of course, is very different kind of a horror film.
So it's more gorier, sort of. Yeah,
it's more folkish, and it's from the folklore and all of that. And even this film also has the elements of folklore and all of that, but we were going for a very different treatment. So he was also very excited and all of that. So yeah, so they were very excited, and it became an Angry Indian Goddesses reunion kind of thing on set, because they were all acting together after a very long time. And though the scenes that we were shooting were very intense and serious, and once the cameras were off, they were all having fun.
I think we have time for one more question. Looks like we're getting really close to the end here, but I really wanted to touch on the music and the sound design. I think those are very effective and important in this particular film, especially in the early parts where we are first meeting Yogi, and he's getting into he sets up his cottage at the resort, and he's having all these nightmares, waking nightmares of these sounds. And then I think the background score also helps to underline the sort of horror elements later on in the film, and it does a really great job of putting you in the frame of mind that you need to be to experience what you want the audience to experience. So talk a little bit about the sound and the music.
Yeah, that was a nightmare, to be honest, especially the music, because we were confused. The sense, to be very honest, initially we were not sure about the kind of music that we should go for, because the more the music, it will become a conventional horror film. If you don't have music, also it won't work. So obviously the composer wanted to have more score. Initially I was kind of resisting and said, no, we should play it subtle, and we should have more silence and all of that. But then when we did the first version and saw it was not working, obviously we had to put in more music. So finding that right balance in terms of the texture and the sound, where to have music, how much music should be there. All that became a big problem. Problem in the sense, it's a nice problem to have. It's a creative problem, but it took us a lot of time. It took nearly 6 months for us to create the music for the film. We did multiple versions, and no, I really was troubling my composer a lot, and so all of that. And sound design, obviously, a film, because it's an atmospheric film. A lot of the creepiness or whatever you talk about has to come from the atmosphere, because it's not a typical horror film where you show things and there are no manipulative camera angles and no jump scares and all that stuff. So the atmosphere plays a very important role. So the sound design, again, we did sync sound, obviously, and of course, after we came back, and we had to really work a lot on the sound, and took a lot of time. And of course, since we won the post-production support from Busan, the final sound mixing was done in Korea. We went to Seoul, and we spent time there in a Korean studio with a Korean sound mixing engineer, and also myself and my sound designer. We went there and worked on the final mix. But even before that, a lot of work in terms of the pre-mix and the sound design, all of that we did in Chennai. It took us a lot of time. Again, we were really, we were initially not sure in terms of the tone, what kind of balance the balance more than anything else, the balance. So we did a lot of versions. But once we started working on it, it became very clear. All our doubts got answered, and it became clear. And of course, budget also was a problem, because we had only limited money to spend on everything, including sound. So how do you work within these constraints also became a problem. And luckily, I have a good sound designer who I have been working with for a very long time. He did my previous film also. He did my short films also. So yeah, I have a good rapport with him, and of course the same with my composer. And since music was very, very important element in the overall sound design, because there was a lot of music in the film. So yeah, it took us time, but yeah, we were able to do it.
Well, excellent. I think that about wraps up our time. I wanted to say thank you very much for letting us show the film and having this conversation with me. It was lovely to talk to you again after a few years. And we look forward to seeing whatever comes next. I think I've seen treatments on some stuff you were wanting to make. So those sounded interesting. So hopefully we can see that sometime in the near future.
Thank you, Josh. And thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this. Thank you. Thanks for watching the film. Thank you.